The ETF industry actually started in Canada. Most people think it started in the US. So the first ETF was launched on March 9th, 1990 in Canada. The first ETF was launched in the US 3 years later. When we look at the ETF industry today, we have ETFs listed in 57 countries now on 70 exchanges. We have nearly $5 trillion invested in ETFs from 380 different issuers. The top challenges for the ETF industry, ironically, is still education. The reason I say that is ETFs now provide exposure to a lot more asset classes. They provide exposure to a lot more benchmarks. And so people need to make sure that they understand the benchmark. Some of the nuances when we look at how ETFs are being used does vary quite a bit by country or region. Recently, we've seen how the mainland Chinese market is opening up. So what does it mean to invest in China A shares? And the fact that MSCI, the benchmark provider, is including A shares into mainstream indices. You need to make sure that you understand what are you buying, because clearly those names don't really tell you very much. So the US market is 70% of global assets. Europe is 16%. In Europe, ETFs are listed on over 20 exchanges. We don't have what I would call a consolidated tape. So there's not an easy way to see how much of an ETF is trading across all these exchanges, bring it all together, and understand the trading liquidity. One of the big interesting markets is if you look at Japan, which currently has about $330 billion of assets invested in the local ETFs, most of that money, 70%, is money that has come from the Bank of Japan, which has been using exclusively locally listed ETFs as their quantitative easing tool. So that's very different than what we've seen in other markets. Investors like ETFs because they are simple, transparent, cost efficient, able to buy in small sizes, and on benchmarks that you know and understand if you read the prospectus. But people often don't read the prospectus, and so they assume, and that's where we've seen some problems where people thought, oh, I'll buy this and I expect X. If you don't do your homework, you probably are going to be surprised and disappointed.